The Senate will come to order.
Mr. President,
Senator Swazinski.
A little enthusiastic for the day, Mr. President. Thank you. Mr. President, I impose a call of the Senate.
The Senate is now under call. Senator Murphy.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and that the Sergeant at Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, would you be so kind as to stand? In our tradition, we start with prayer, and today's chaplain is Reverend Joseph Johnson from the Cathedral of St. Paul. And following the prayer, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Lord God, we ask you to endow our elected leaders with goodwill towards one another and a lively hope for what they can accomplish together. Grant their minds the wisdom and prudence needed to address the many challenges facing our community today. Fill their hearts with a generous spirit of service. Bless our legislators, all their collaborators, and their work for the welfare of everyone who calls Minnesota home. Amen.
Thank you, members. The secretary will take the roll.
Abler, Anderson, Barr, Bolden, Carlson, Champion, Clark, Coleman, Swazinski, Dames, Dibble, Dornick, Draheim, Drazkowski, Duckworth, Farnsworth, Fateh, Friends, Green, Grunhagen, Gustafson, Hoschild, Herr, Heinzman, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Jasinski, Johnson, Johnson-Stewart, Klein, Karan, Kroon, Kunish, Kupik, Lang, Latz, Liskey, Limmer, Lucero, Mann, Marty, Matthews, Quaid, McEwen, Miller, Mitchell, Mohammed, Murphy, Nelson, Verbaten, Pappas, Pa, Port, Pratt, Putnam, Rarick, Rasmussen, Rest, Seeberger, Utke, Weber, Wiesenberg, Westland, Westrom, Wickland, Zhang.
Members, a quorum is present. The following members intend to vote from a remote location under Rule 40.7. Senator Draheim. Members, I have two motions for your consideration. The first is pursuant to Rule 12.5, Senator Port, moved that the following members be excused for a conference committee on Senate File Number 2298 at 1 p.m. Senators Port, Bowden, and Lucero. On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The second conference committee excused notion would be pursuant to Rule 12.5, Senator Dibble. Senator Dibble moves that the following members be excused for a conference committee on House File 2438 at 2 p.m. That would be Senators Dibble, Carlson, Jasinski, Johnson, Stewart, and Clark. On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, if you want to follow along, as usual, I am reading from today's Senate agenda, which is dated Thursday, May 8th Thursday, May 8th, 2025 at 1 o'clock. We will begin with the second order of business, which is executive and official communications. The following communications was received and referred as indicated. We'll now move to the third order of business, which is messages from the House. The secretary will read the first message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce that the House has acceded to the request of the Senate for the appointment of a conference committee consisting of 6 members of the House on the amendments adopted by the House to the following Senate file. Senate File Number 2077, a bill for an act relating to state government, appropriating money for environment and natural resources. There has been appointed as such committee on the part of the House Heinzman, Schultz, Nelson, Fisher, Purcell, and Finke. Senate File Number 2077 is herewith returned to the Senate. Signed, Patrick Duffy Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Members, no action is required. The secretary will read the next message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce that the House has acceded to the request of the Senate for the appointment of a conference committee consisting of 4 members of the House on the amendments adopted by the House to the following Senate file. Senate File Number 2370, a bill for an act relating to cannabis. There has been appointed as such committee on the part of the House Stevenson, Hanson J., West, and Allen. Senate File Number 2370 is herewith returned to the Senate. Signed, Patrick Duffy Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
No action is required. The Secretary will read the next message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce that the House refuses to concur in the Senate amendments to House File Number 2115. House File Number 2115, a bill for an act relating to human services, modifying policy provisions relating to aging and disability services, the Department of Health, Direct Care and Treatment, Behavioral Health, and the Department of Human Services Office of Inspector General. The House respectfully requests that a conference committee of 4 members be appointed thereon. Schumacher, Gander, Knorr, and Frederick have been appointed as such committee on the part of the House. House File Number 2115 is herewith transmitted to the Senate with a request that the Senate appoint a like committee. Signed, Patrick Duffy Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Senator Murphy for a motion on behalf of Senator Hoffman.
Mr. President, for Senator Hoffman, I move that the Senate accede to the request of the House for a conference committee on House File 2115, and that a conference committee of 5 members be appointed by the Subcommittee on Conference Committees on the part of the Senate to act with a like conference committee appointed on the part of the House.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The Secretary will read the next message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce that the House refuses to concur in the Senate amendments to House File Number 2434. House File Number 2434, a bill for an act relating to human services. The House respectfully requests that a conference committee of 6 members be appointed thereon. Schumacher, Gilman, Jacob, Noor, Keeler, and Curran have been appointed as such committee on the part of the House. House File Number 2434 is herewith transmitted to the Senate with a request that the Senate appoint a like committee. Signed, Patrick Duffy Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Senator Hoffman for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate accede to the request of the House for a conference committee on House File Number 2434, and that a conference committee of 5 members be appointed by the Subcommittee on Conference Committees on part of the Senate to act with a like conference committee appointed on the part of the House. Thank you, Mr. President.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, we will now proceed to the 5th order of business. There's a committee report to read at the desk. The Secretary will read the report.
Senator Marty from the Committee on Finance, to which was referred House File Number 2442, a bill for an act relating to energy, appropriating money for energy and renewable development account programs and activities. Reports the same back with the recommendation that the bill be amended as follows, and when so amended, the bill do pass.
Senator Murphy for a motion to adopt the report.
Mr. President, I move the committee report read by the Secretary be adopted.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. We are now moving to the 7th order of business, which is second reading of House bills. The Secretary will read the House file numbers.
House File Number 2442.
The House files have been given their second reading. Members, we will now proceed to the 8th order of business, which is the introduction and first reading of Senate bills. The bills listed on today's introduction calendar are given their first reading and referred as indicated. Moving on to the 9th order of business, motions and resolutions. Senate resolutions numbers 42 to 43 will be referred to the Committee on Rules and Administration. And members, there's no action that is required. However, we are remaining on the motions and resolutions. Senator Murphy for Senator Murphy to designate your special orders.
Mr. President, pursuant to Rule 26, I designate the following bills be made special orders for immediate consideration, and the list is on your desk.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. In fact, members, it is true that the special orders list is on your desk. We will begin with Senate File Number 3446, which is the claims bill from Senator Clark.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Senate File 3446 is the annual claims settlement appropriation bill. Established in 1976, the Joint Senate and House Subcommittee on Claims was established to hear and recommend whether or not to pay claims against the state by by various people who cannot proceed against the state under the normal State Tort Claims Act. Prior to the Subcommittee on Claims, the Department of Corrections reviews all claims and their counsel makes recommendations for disposition. The 2025 Claims Bill appropriates a total of $72,381. Within this, there is a single exoneration claim, reimbursement to the Department of Corrections, and a payment for permanent injuries. The claims in the bill were unanimously approved by the joint Senate and House Claims Subcommittee on Claims. I'd like to thank Senator Carlson for his guidance and mentorship to bring me up to speed on this and answering my many, many questions. And also thank you to Senators Anderson and Senator Westland, who provided me with a bit of insight on the process. And also thank you to Jason Keenley, Assistant Deputy Revisor and Counsel for the Joint Subcommittee on Claims. Mr. President, the Claims Bill is a simple yet important bill. This is the rare spot where we, the Minnesota Senate, can provide direct justice to exonerated individuals like Vincent Below, named in this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clark. Any other discussion on Senate File number 3446? Seeing none, the Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
Senate File number 3446, a bill for an act relating to claims against the state, providing for the settlement of certain claims, appropriating money.
Third reading. Any other discussion on Senate File number 3446 before we vote for final passage? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll on Senate File number 3446. Senator Westland, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will play it straight with the remote votes here. Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Port votes aye.
Senator Port votes aye.
Senator Zhang votes aye.
Senator Zhang votes aye.
And I believe that's it, Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Draheim votes aye.
Senator Draheim votes aye.
Senator Lucero votes aye.
Senator Lucero votes aye. All senators having voted, who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There have been 66 ayes and 1 sole nay. The bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, we will now go to Senate File 856. Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate File 856 is about something fundamental, trust. Trust that when Minnesotans pay their taxes, the money is going where it's supposed to go, to kids, families, public services, not being siphoned away through fraud, mismanagement, or abuse. We have made real progress over the last few years, tighter controls, better enforcement, but the truth is our current system is still too reactive. We often find fraud only after it's occurred. Senate File 856 is about getting ahead of it. This bill establishes an independent, nonpartisan Office of Inspector General. with the authority to investigate fraud and misuse across all state agencies and programs. It doesn't interfere with existing federal mandates or embedded agency roles. Instead, it creates a second layer of oversight to make sure Minnesotans are protected. The Inspector General will operate with professional standards, be appointed through a bipartisan process, and report to the public, not the agency being investigated. That's intentional. That's how you build independence and trust. And in a year where we are scrutinizing every dollar, let's remember that fraud is expensive. Oversight is cheaper than scandal. This bill is about prevention, accountability, and protecting the public good. And with that, Mr. President, I have an A91 amendment.
Senator Gustafson offers the A91 amendment. The Secretary will report the A91 amendment.
Senator Gustafson moves to amend Senate File Number 856 as follows. Page 5, line 4, after the period, insert. This is the A91 amendment.
Senator Gustafson to your A91 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The A91 is an author's amendment. It's mostly technical. It requires that the approval of the appointment of an Inspector General to an additional term be confirmed by a 3/5 vote of the Senate. It allows for the IG to contract with Minute for Information Technology Services under Section 16E.016. It includes language clarifications requested from MMB, and it adds a requirement for the OIG to enter into an interagency agreement with the Department of Health.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the A91 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The A91 is adopted. Any other amendments from Senator Gustafson? Any other amendments, Senator Gustafson?
No, Mr. President.
Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minnesota has been subject to at least $650 million in fraud in recent years. And fraud should not be the price of doing business. It should never become normal or accepted. This is money coming from regular, hardworking Minnesotans who get up and go to work every day, pay their taxes, and expect that their tax dollars go where they're supposed to go, not to fraudsters who would rather take advantage of our goodwill than get a real job and become productive members of society. Our government must take fraud seriously. Fraud undermines Minnesotans' trust in their government. This bill is the result of the failure of the executive branch to take fraud seriously. And, Mr. President, we need to have a strong legislative response. In this bill today, establishing the Office of Inspector General is a key part to that strong legislative response. It'll establish an independent Office of Inspector General with authority to investigate providers and recipients of government services across our entire state government. This bill gives the OIG broad authority with investigative tools to stop fraud. And Mr. President, this effort has truly been a bipartisan effort. It's really how legislation should be made in this body. There are going to be 10 engrossments, 11 committee stops, and it's been a real bipartisan effort with all sorts of members, both parties, actively involved in putting this together. So, Mr. President, I would encourage us, let's set a strong example for Minnesota. Let's tell them we hear them and we are acting to prevent fraud in Minnesota. Thank you.
Any other discussions or amendments for Senate File Number 856? Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know there's more amendments out there, Mr. President, but the pregnant pause brought me to make certain that we had time for those. I move the A86 amendment.
Senator Jaskowski moves the A86 amendment. The Secretary will report the A86 amendment.
Senator Drazkowski moves to amend Senate File Number 856 as follows. Page 13, line 4, before the, insert A. This is the A86 amendment.
Senator Jaskowski to your A86 amendment.
Mr. President, it might make sense actually for another amendment to come before this one. Could I withdraw the amendment for now, Mr. President?
The A86 amendment is withdrawn. Any other announcements? Senator Latz.
Mr. President, I'd like to offer the A85 amendment.
Senator Latz offers the A85 amendment. The Secretary will report the A85 amendment.
Senator Latz moves to amend Senate File Number 856 as follows. Page 6, line 5, after 2, insert. This is the A85 amendment.
Senator Latz, to your amendment.
Mr. President and members, the A85 amendment authorizes the Inspector General to establish a law enforcement agency within the Office of the Inspector General to be known as the Office of Inspector General Anti-Fraud and Waste Bureau, giving it authority to conduct statewide investigations, to make statewide arrests under existing statutory authority, and would have the primary jurisdiction limited to offenses involving fraud, abuse, and any other criminal conduct within the jurisdiction of the Office of the Inspector General as described in the underlying bill. Members, there are a number of guardrails and restrictions in place here, including data practices, including agency sharing arrangements, and notifications of local law enforcement agencies with primary jurisdiction when someone is being investigated within those local jurisdictions as well. It does give arrest authority to this agency. It would have to be led by a chief law enforcement officer who meets all of the traditional criteria for being a chief law enforcement officer in Minnesota. It gives cooperative authority with local agencies and with local law enforcement peace officers who could work with and on behalf of the statewide agency. Members, I think it's really important for a new Inspector General, should he or she decide that it's helpful, to have the authority to establish this agency. This agency would remain, as a law enforcement agency, would give the tools that would be helpful for the Inspector General to conduct their investigations, to follow up on reports of suspected fraud and abuse and criminal conduct with relation to public funds. These are the kind of tools that might prove to be necessary as well. This does not mandate that the Inspector General establish this agency as a law enforcement bureau, but should, as that Inspector General is getting established, or once they are established and they look around and see what tools they have and resources they have, and they determine that they need the additional law enforcement powers to be able to do their work, then it gives them the authority to go ahead and do that, subject to the restrictions and guardrails that are in the proposed amendment. So I encourage a green vote on this, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Senator Gustafson, to the A85 Latz amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also view this as a friendly amendment and encourage members to vote green.
Any other discussion? Senator Wickland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Latz yield for a question?
Senator Latz, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Wickland.
Mr. President, Senator Latz, was this proposal for adding this entire section to the Senate File 856 heard in any committee?
Senator Latz, to the question.
Mr. President, Senator Wickland, not that I'm aware of, although as this body showed a few days ago, committee review of substantial changes on the floor does not seem to be that high a priority on the Senate floor. So I don't see that as a problem here.
Senator Wickland.
Mr. President, I'd like to voice a real strong concern about this amendment. For one thing, not having gone through the committee process, I have strong concerns about it being added to a bill that already would give a new agency very broad powers, and adding a specific law enforcement division to that agency. I would strongly urge members to think about how that should be heard in a committee or in committees. I would see it as something that would be needed to be heard in the Health and Human Services Committee, because I would want to hear from not only the agencies that are affected, because there might be investigations that go on that affect areas within their jurisdiction, but also to hear from the community and from stakeholders who might be affected by the ability for the Office of Inspector General to have a law enforcement division within that agency. We know that there needs to be a balance between what law enforcement is able to do and due process and notification and rights of individuals to understand what the processes are going to be used by this Office of Inspector General. And as the bill stands right now, there is not clear language about due process and rights for appeal or rights for notification. There's not that clear language even existing in the bill. So I have strong concerns about this being added at this time on the floor, and I would vote red, and I would urge members to oppose the amendment.
Any other discussion on the A85 amendment? Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Latz, for the amendment. Members, this is a good amendment. It's actually necessary to provide the independence in this office to ensure that this Office of the Inspector General is an independent entity. And before I get further, Mr. President, I would just like to recognize and thank Senator Gustafson for her work and leadership on this bill. She hasn't slept a lot probably since session began. She's worked very, very hard, diligently, bipartisanly, and with all of the right reasons moving forward. And this amendment gives this agency the independence that it needs. And as we talked, and I have talked with other Office of Inspector Generals around the country and people who have worked within some of the agency OIGs here in Minnesota, this is important to make certain that the agency has the autonomy and isn't held up by politics within the executive branch. And those of us that have been meeting on this, we're very, very concerned about this. This gives that insulation, that insurance that the work of the OIG will actually come forward to fruition and be carried forward and won't run into any roadblocks, political or otherwise, because it will have the autonomy that it needs to go forward in earnest to protect the resources of the people of Minnesota. So for those reasons, I encourage your adoption or your vote for the adoption of this amendment, and thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President. I share Senator Wickland's skepticism and objections. I will be voting no, and I ask for a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. I would just like to note that we did have a law enforcement provision in the bill as it was introduced. For the first couple of committee stops, it did have two law enforcement officers to be embedded within the Office of Inspector General. But we took that language out because it wasn't quite detailed enough, and it wasn't in the normal form that it would normally have to be in to establish a law enforcement office within the Office of Inspector General. The amendment that's before you is a pretty, I don't want to say boilerplate, but it's a pretty common way and form to give this office the option to add a law enforcement in the right way that's technically sound and that will work. So I wanted to provide that context that there was a law enforcement provision as it did go through some committees. And the Judiciary Committee has been actively involved, of course, with Senator Latz offering the amendment itself. I would also just like to point out to the body that this is one of the reasons why this office is best housed in the executive branch where it is so that the Office of Inspector does have this option for law enforcement division if the Office of Inspector General so chooses, which would not be available if we had established this office in the legislative branch. So I just wanted to provide that context and encourage all members to vote yes on this amendment. Thank you.
I am now going to Senator Wickland. After Senator Wickland, if there are no other discussions, then I'll go to the author of the amendment as the last person and last voice that you would hear. Senator Wickland.
Mr. President, I was just going to ask for a roll call, and that's been done, so no other comments.
Senator Latz, any final words before we vote, or are you okay with this voting? Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it will be helpful, members, if we go ahead and establish an Office of Inspector General to make sure that that office has the teeth and the tools to do the job. One important part of that is making the OIG independent from individual agencies that might in fact be subject of investigation or programs embedded in those individual agencies that might be subject to investigation. It avoids concerns about agency capture, which bureaucratically, organizationally is in the literature as a concern whenever you have even inspectors general embedded within an agency. So that's the value of having an independent OIG as is proposed in the underlying bill. We also want to make sure, I want to make sure anyway, that that Inspector General has the teeth and the tools necessary to conduct an effective investigation. Law enforcement officers are specifically trained in conducting those kinds of investigations. They have the tools, the training, and the authority to get the information that they need in order to do so. They are still constrained by the Constitution. The fact that there is no specific due process language, for example, in here, or appeal rights in here, notwithstanding, the Constitution binds all of us, including any government agency that is conducting an investigation. So I think this will be helpful in support of the goals of an important anti-fraud policy that we have proposed here by Senator Gustafson, and I hope that you will join me in giving the Office of Inspector General the necessary tools and teeth to conduct the work safely and effectively.
The Secretary will take the roll on the A85 Latz Amendment. Senator Westland, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Bolden votes no.
Senator Bolden votes no.
Senator Port votes no.
Senator Port votes no.
Senator Zhang votes aye.
Senator Zhang votes aye.
Senator Kunesh votes aye.
Senator Kunesh votes aye.
And Senator Klein votes aye.
And Senator Klein votes aye. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Draheim votes aye.
Senator Draheim votes aye.
Senator Lucero votes aye.
And Senator Lucero votes aye.
Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Apologize. Senator Johnson votes aye.
Senator Johnson votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There have been 50 ayes and 14 nays. The A85 Latz Amendment is adopted. Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now I move the A86 amendment.
Senator Jaskowski offers the A86 amendment. The Secretary will report the A86 amendment.
Senator Drazkowski moves to amend Senate File Number 856 as follows. Page 13, line 4, before the, insert A. This is the A86 amendment.
Senator Jaskowski to your A86 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, early this year, the governor put forward an executive order that began consolidation of the white-collar crime and fraud law enforcement efforts within state government. And that meant he put forward an executive order to bring the Commerce Fraud Bureau law enforcement unit over to the BCA to merge with their financial crimes unit. And it has formed the new financial crimes and fraud section within the BCA. And that, I believe, was a good start. And as we look at the future of where this office should be and what the spirit of that effort was then and should be as we move forward, it makes sense to bring together that unit and the Office of the Inspector General to land truly all of the fraud protection, waste and abuse efforts of the white-collar crime, finance crimes within state government in one place. And I was working on language, Mr. President and members, to do that, but better than that, rather some more deliberation about it, something that has more time for input. I brought forward an amendment that would require and ask the Legislative Inspector General's Advisory Commission, which is part of this bill, which, members, is in the legislative branch, ask them to meet in the interim after we're adjourned here, either next week or next month or the month after that, Mr. President, and look at what it would take in order to merge that now formed unit within BCA in with the Office of Inspector General. And that's what this amendment would do. It would say Legislative Inspector General Advisory Commission, meet, have a hearing, report back to legislature on January 1st, and also include in that report your suggestion for language that would merge the units together. So that's what this amendment does. And I will just outline that moving the finance crimes and fraud section from DPS to the OIG takes forward the governor's initiative. The BCA does excel at its mission of critical work investigating violent crimes, narcotics, sex offenses, and others, but the white-collar financial crimes are quite different, and actually the Office of Inspector General would be the best place, I think, for this to be. So this, again, does continue the momentum that the governor started early this year and brings it forward as a recommendation to the legislature for us to respond to in January of next year. That's my amendment. I encourage your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gustafson to the A86 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's always good to have information. I would ask members that I will take this as a friendly amendment. Members could vote green.
All in favor of the A86 amendment say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The A86 amendment is adopted. Senator Kroon. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to offer the A63 amendment.
Senator Matthews offers the A63 amendment. The Secretary will report the A63 amendment.
Senator Matthews moves to amend Senate File Number 856 as follows. Page 19, after line 6, insert. This is the A63 amendment.
Senator Matthews to your A63 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The A63 amendment is based from a bill that I carried earlier this session for additional whistleblower protections. It got hearings in 2 different committees earlier this session, and all it seeks to do is to ensure and add public employees and employees in our state agencies some protection under the whistleblower statute. So if a employee of an agency or public employee in good faith is reporting fraud or misuse in programs to their employer or a governmental body or law enforcement official or the legislative auditor or member of the legislature, they get the whistleblower protections to protect them from any discrimination against them for said disclosures. This has been long-standing, I believe is needed to help us have as many eyes as we can to see if there are any problems going on so that hopefully we can catch it early on and keep a big problem like feeding our future from getting into larger, blown out of proportion elements and allow us to try to catch something in its infancy and correct it early on. So I would urge members' support of this amendment. Thank you.
Senator Gustafson to the A63 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Matthews, for your work on this bill. It is a friendly amendment. Members should vote green.
All in favor of the A63 amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. The motion prevails. The A63 is adopted. Members, before I call on Senator Kroon, pursuant to Rule 12.5, Senator Latz moves that following members be excused for a conference committee on House File 2432 at 2 o'clock p.m. today. Senators Latz, Senators Umu Verbaden, Senator Seeberger, Senator Westland, and Senator Clark. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. The motion prevails. Now, Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to offer the A87.
Senator Kroon offers the A87 amendment. The Secretary will report the A87 amendment.
Senator Kroon moves to amend Senate File Number 856 as follows. Page 8, delete line 5 and insert. This is the A87 amendment.
Senator Kroon to your your A87 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment is the result of a lot of discussions with the Department of Human Services, along with several members, to come up with a workable bill that has the overall intent to make sure that the Office of Inspector General is effective and has the authority to do its work across all of the state agencies, while recognizing that not all agencies are the same, and that some agencies have special duties and responsibilities within them that we don't want to disturb for a variety of reasons. So how we've dealt with this in a number of different areas in the bill. We've worked in the Finance Committee with Senator Marty to come up with some language that gives the agencies first crack at pausing payments and those sorts of things, and only and provides for collaboration between the Office of Inspector and the agencies. We have most of the embedded Inspector Generals are moving over to the Office of Inspector General, but we have kept some in place that are there for specified reasons, particularly in the Department of Human Services when it comes to Medicaid fraud, which we think will be consistent with federal provisions. So we've taken a lot of steps. This A87 is one more step to alleviate some concern about whether or not the Office of Inspector General's ability to petition the court, not unilaterally, but petition the court to freeze funds after consulting with the agency and after giving the agency the ability to do that on its own. If there's any concerns about whether or not the federal government would have an issue with this, what this amendment does, the A87, is it changes the effective date of two provisions in this bill so that it would become effective upon federal approval from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or January 1, 2026, whichever is later. And so it would set up that process. And, Mr. President, this would allow the federal government to chime in if there's anything in the interagency agreement portion of this provision or anything in this provision that would ultimately authorize the Office of Inspector General to petition the court to freeze funds relating to Medicaid fraud. So that's what this amendment does, is it gives the federal government opportunity to chime in and approve those provisions before those specific provisions in the bill become effective. So I think this will alleviate a lot of concerns that I've been hearing, and it's our effort, one of many efforts, to work with as many stakeholders as possible to address their concerns and move forward in terms of a broad consensus as much as possible. So I'd urge members to support the A87.
Senator Gustafson to the A87 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a friendly amendment, and this is the result of a lot of work and a lot of meetings. We're probably going to hear, my guess, is some information or some ideas about federal funding being in peril. With this amendment, this should clear up those concerns. It requires that the federal government must approve our interagency agreements to make sure that our work here with the OIG would not be vulnerable to losing any federal funding. This is a good amendment. This alleviates a lot of the concerns. This came from our work with the agencies, and I encourage members to support this amendment, and I'd ask for a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Any other discussion on the A87? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll on the A87 amendment. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Draheim votes aye.
Senator Draheim votes aye.
Senator Johnson votes aye.
Senator Johnson votes aye.
Senator Lucero votes aye.
Senator Lucero votes aye. Senator Westland, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Port votes aye.
Senator Port votes aye.
Senator Zhang votes aye.
Senator Zhang votes aye.
Senator Kunish votes aye.
Senator Kunish votes aye.
I believe that's everyone, Mr. Chair. Mr.
All senators having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 5 nays, the A87 Kroon amendment is adopted. Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to offer the A89.
Senator Kroon offers the A89 amendment. The Secretary will report the A89 amendment.
Senator Kroon moves to amend Senate File Number 856 as follows. Page 16, after line 33, insert. This is the A89 amendment.
Senator Kroon to your A89 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This A89 amendment is, again, the result of a lot of discussions and work with the agencies and the stakeholders and other members. Mr. President, as we all know, much of the fraud that we've been hearing about in the news among those, one of the biggest, if well, the biggest, is the Feeding Our Future scandal, which involved the Department of Education. And so that's a particularly sensitive subject. And early on in this bill, the embedded inspector generals within the Department of Education are being transferred over to the Office of Inspector General. There will still be specialized inspector generals that will specialize in education, but they're moving over to the Office of Inspector General. With that change, there was some statutes that were repealed in our bill relating to the current embedded inspector general within the Department of Education. The Department of Education came to us recently and asked that some of that language be put back into the bill. And so I had a long conversation with the Director of Government Relations at MDE last night, going over some of this language, and he convinced me that it made a lot of sense to do this, because what this amendment will do is set up a statutory infrastructure so that the Commissioner of Education will still have some of the tools to combat fraud and sanction and withhold funds and those sorts of things that the Commissioner currently has. And we don't want to take away tools from our agencies who are all charged with preventing fraud here within their agencies in Minnesota. So after going through it, we put some of the statute back in, and that's what's reflected in the A89, to give the Commissioner of Education the tools they need to combat fraud, working in conjunction with the new Office of Inspector General upon the recommendation of the Inspector General. And we put in some language that's consistent with other parts of the bill that says that nothing in this limits the jurisdiction or the authorities of the Office of Inspector General to do its work across all agencies, including the Department of Education, except for one exception, and that is set forth on page 1, lines 1:7 through 1:10. The Office of Inspector General would not have the jurisdiction to basically cut off state or federal aid to our schools, in other words, and that will remain within the commissioners. In the very unlikely event where that would be necessary, this would be a pretty rare instance where a school district got itself. This would not be relating to anything like Feeding Our Future. The Office of Inspector General would still have all the authority to go in and investigate and do that work. But if it relates directly to our school districts that are committing the fraud, that would be within the commissioner's responsibility to, if it rose to the level of having to include as part of the sanction, cutting off state or federal aid, which we hope would never happen, that would not be within the purview of the Inspector General. I thought that was a reasonable compromise to work with our partners at the Department of Education. So we worked with them to get this amendment drafted, and that's what I'm here presenting with the A89, and I encourage all members to vote yes.
Senator Gustafson to the A89 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Cruin is correct. This was a long process to make sure that we got it right and struck the right balance. This is a good amendment. It comes from MDE. It clears up that gap that was talked about, and I encourage members to support this.
All in favor of the A89, adoption of the A89, say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails and the A89 Cruin amendment is adopted. Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to offer the A90.
Senator McQuaid offers the A90, and the Secretary will report the A90 amendment.
Senator McQuaid moves to amend Senate File Number 856 as follows. Page 7, after line 34, insert. This is the A90 amendment.
Senator McQuaid to your A90 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment is a notification amendment. It just says that if public funds are stopped or frozen, any person who receives those public funds who might have them interrupted but is not implicated in suspected fraud or misuse will receive notice of their rights related to the continued receipt of public funds. So a really good example, there was a child care provider in Rochester. The parents showed up one day with their kids, and there was a notice on the door that said, you know, this is closed. They weren't notified. Most of the kids were on CCAP, that they could take those CCAP dollars and go other places. And so this would just allow notification to those folks. And this is an amendment that I'm offering on behalf of Senator Bolden.
Senator Gustafson to the A90 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to Senator Bolden. Thank you to Senator McQuaid. This is a friendly amendment. I'd encourage members to support it.
All in favor of the A90 amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The A90 amendment is adopted. Any other amendments before we go to third reading? Seeing none, the Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
Senate File Number 856, a bill for an act relating to state government, creating the Office of the Inspector General.
Third reading. Any other discussion before we take a vote on final passage of this Senate File 856. Senator Abler.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I just, first I want to thank all the people that worked on this. I don't even know how long the list is. but it would be very long. And this is an example, I think, what people want us to do here is work together and get something done. Work together. Could you please combat fraud? Could you agree it's a bad idea? Could you find a way to, for the future, to have it not happen anymore? Could you make sure that the money that we're giving you in such large amounts is used very carefully and goes to the purpose for which it's that is set to do? And I think this bill accomplishes that. I know, Mr. President, there's concern about CMS and all that, and I just frankly don't understand. There already is an Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Human Services, which has a bit of authority, but there are times that it would be benefited by a second set of eyes in a larger place like this. And so even though the DHS has primary, OIG has primary responsibility, this would be just a really useful thing. Case in point would be the Feeding Our Futures thing, where nobody in Minnesota did much of anything. And then the federal attorney, U.S. attorney, came and just made a big thing out of it. So do we need this maybe? Well, just to make sure, we're spending $70 billion of people's money every 2 years, more all the time. So members, I'm really happy to be voting for this, and I encourage you to vote green as well. Thank you.
Members, can you give us just one moment, please? Well, in fact, no. Senator Hoffman has a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion that we reconsider third reading.
Senator Hoffman, give me just one moment.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hoffman, can you give us a brief explanation why we should go back and reconsider third reading?
Yes, Mr. President. We aren't sure if CMS would be able to approve the shared investigatory judiciary or the Medicaid issues that are in this bill. It was my understanding that folks were going to be talking with the Department of Human Services, specifically the Medicaid professionals that are CMS, people that understand this world, right? And I gave the examples, and I'm not seeing that this is taken care of in this bill. I have concerns about this bill, Mr. President, because if CMS decides they are the ultimate authority in this, that it doesn't meet the mustard of what a bill should do when it comes to a Medicaid single point or a single state agency, then you're going to have to start the process all over again next year. So until the assurances are there, Mr. President, I have 17 amendments I'd like to offer to the body.
All right. So it sounds like, Senator Hoffman, that you have some amendments that you like to offer that you did not get a chance to offer. Is that correct?
That's the affirmative, Mr. President.
All right. Members, all in favor?
Mr. President?
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can we roll call the motion?
Roll call requested, roll call granted. The motion the motion before the body is a motion to reconsider third reading. And a roll call has been requested and a roll call has been granted. The secretary will take the roll on the motion to reconsider. Senator French, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to report that Senator Bolden votes yes.
Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Port votes yes.
Senator Port votes aye.
Senator Kunish votes no.
Senator Kunish votes no.
Senator Latz votes no.
Senator Latz votes no.
Senator Umu Verbatim votes no.
Senator Umu Verbatim votes no.
Senator Clark votes no.
Senator Clark votes no.
Senator Seeberger votes no.
Senator Seeberger votes no.
Senator Westland votes no.
Senator Westland votes no.
Senator Zhang votes no.
Senator Zhang votes no.
Senator Dibble votes no.
Senator Dibble votes no.
Senator Klein votes no.
Senator Klein votes no.
Senator Johnson Stewart votes no.
Senator Johnson Stewart votes no.
Senator Carlson votes no.
Senator Carlson votes no.
Senator Marty votes yes.
Senator Marty votes yes. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Draheim votes no.
Senator Draheim votes no.
Senator Lucero votes no.
Senator Lucero votes no. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There being 19 ayes and 45 noes, the motion to reconsider does not prevail. Members, we are still on third reading, and I'm going to Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, first of all, Mr. President, I want to thank the authors of this bill for working in a strong bipartisan fashion to get it done. I've been as critical of the Walz administration as anyone on the amount of fraud that we've seen in this state, and really the lack of attention to try to prevent that fraud going forward. I think this is going to be a strong tool for us as a state to prevent more fraud, waste, and abuse, and being able to protect our taxpayer dollars. When we grant these funds, when we make these appropriations, we expect them to do the job that they're supposed to do. And when we have a U.S. Attorney General highlighting the fact that Minnesota is among the worst states for fraud, we have to take a serious look. And what I appreciate about the authors working is that they realized this was not a partisan issue. This was an issue that should be bipartisan. We should all be standing up to work against and work for preventing fraud and being able to stop it from occurring before we have to try to recover those funds afterward. So, Mr. President, I just again wanted to say thank you to the authors and encourage members to vote yes on the final passage.
Senator Corran.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd also like to rise in support and thank the team. There aren't enough, in this case, I think we ran into a problem. There weren't enough opportunities on the bill to sign for authors. And what people didn't see is that bipartisan, bicameral initiative was every Tuesday night, almost for the entire session. There were 20-some people there, nonpartisan staff, partisan staff, House, Senate, Republican, Democrat. And the work and the iterative work going through it really put together a great structure. When you think about those things that have occurred over the last 6 years in the level of theft and fraud, in addition to the rapid change and the skill sets of the thieves, this independent inspector general's office, which is encapsulated in all of the work that's been put into this bill, in addition to the most recent changes, which clearly delineates and protects any program under which is Medicaid supported, in addition to all other agencies. It's a great foundation. It does not in any way take away from an agency's responsibility to continue to manage the operational sides of doing their job. We also need them to do their jobs better. But in this case, a centralized independent inspector general's office not only should be the centralized point for all white-collar crimes, theft of dollar, resources, data, all of those things we need them consolidated so we can look at those levels of fraud that move from an individual effort to an organized crime pattern for which we've seen a rapid rise. So, Mr. President, this is a great bill and a foundation to finally put some resources and effort into making sure that fraud doesn't occur at any level, and it will actually support the agencies, whether they agree with it or not at this point, and it should serve in a supportive role. So I'm looking forward to a green vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Wickland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the bill. I'm planning to vote no. I think there are several reasons. I have been working with the author, with Senator Kroon, for multiple weeks. When this bill was heard in the Health and Human Services Committee, we had a discussion about the authority of a new entity and how it should interact with the health and human services type programs. And we established language in the bill at that time that established a clear definition of the role for the OIG versus what is being done today in the Department of Human Services, Department of Children, Youth, and Families. and in the Department of Health. And at that time, I thought that things were clear that we needed to be careful about how we grant a new entity authority over programs that affect vulnerable people in our state, and many of our significant programs like Medicaid, Child Care Assistance Program, and WIC. After the bill left my committee, it was greatly changed in another committee stop, and those clear lines of definition of who would have the authority to do investigations was removed. So at this point, the bill, there have been some changes made that do address some of the concerns I had. And in the Finance Committee, there were additions to try and put some protections in place about how an investigation would proceed if it related to Medicaid or Child Care Assistance or WIC. I think those are helpful, but they do not, in the end, protect against there being simultaneous investigations of similar incidents or similar reports. And I really have strong concerns about the lack of definition of how it will work to have multiple entities investigating complex programs. So I can't support the bill today. I think the open items, one that I mentioned earlier, the due process language, some of that has been resolved, as at least with respect to the Department of Education. I think that is an important step, but the Office of Inspector General language in general, I don't think that the full due process notice and appeal language has been fleshed out enough, and I think that there should be more discussion about whether that language is adequate. The jurisdictional authority, the amendment that Senator Kroon offered does help to at least put a definition around needing to get the federal response before we put in place something that could jeopardize our relationship with the federal government and ultimately our funding. But it does not contain all of the recommended language that the Department of Human Services has provided that they feel is necessary to make sure that we are clear that we have defined how we believe these groups should work together, that there should be collaboration to discuss what happens if an investigation comes up that is they would like to share investigative authority. Ultimately, there needs to be one decision maker on things like whether funds are withheld with relationship to Medicaid, and that one decision maker needs to be the Department of Human Services, because that is our state Medicaid agency that has the agreement, state plan amendment with the department, with the federal CMS. So I think that it was good to add the contingency paragraphs, but it doesn't fully clarify what is necessary to make sure that CMS, when they examine our legislative intent, that they're clear about how we understand that this process is going to work with having an Office of Inspector General and the DHS Office of Inspector General. I also have a concern in the Finance Committee. The fiscal plan was included, and the appropriations were amended. And at this point, the fiscal note will not include funding for personnel within the Department of Human Services, the Department of Health, and the Department of Children, Youth, and Families that they have requested. If this Office of Inspector General is put in place, there will be work for the agencies to interact with this OIG to assist with duties and investigations. There will be interaction. There will be work for the agencies, and they had modest requests for personnel to perform that work. For example, in the Department of Health, it's especially complicated because investigations that have to do with WIC utilize a federal database or federal system that is not something that anybody can interact with other than Department of Health personnel. So if they are looking for information from the federal system, they will have to interact with Department of Health personnel on that. So I'm disappointed that that is not acknowledged in the appropriations that are included in the bill. And then I guess last I'll just comment on the addition of the law enforcement section that was added today without any discussion or vetting in committee and without discussing the impact on individuals or how this might work, to give people a broader opportunity to be able to discuss that, I think is really a serious mistake that we're making by adding that today. And just in closing, I want to say that human services programs are very complex. The Department of Human Services and Children and Families and Department of Health, they all are working diligently to address fraud and manage the complex rules and regulations that individuals, providers, and recipients have to follow. And I think that this bill could have benefited from more discussion about the impact of adding an Office of Inspector General. Because it won't just affect the agencies, it'll affect providers, and in turn it can affect recipients. And I think that we want to be thoughtful and considerate about how it might affect individuals in the community who are receiving services from multiple, from a provider who might be providing multiple services like a Medicaid service or a state-only service. So I don't think the bill has gone far enough to make sure that we are considering these factors, and I think it's important to answer these questions before we move forward with a state service or a state Office of Inspector General. I too want to see us address fraud in a significant way, and we are doing that today. We are including additional capabilities for the Department of Human Services in the Health and Human Services bill. So appreciate being able to add my comments, but I cannot support the bill today.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to say that I really look forward to this bill becoming law, and that the Office of Inspector General will become a useful force in protecting our local citizens, our local agencies from excessive fraud. In helping my local communities with the food shelf, collecting food and helping different food shelves throughout Wright County, I've had people come up to me and say, we have people coming outside of our county that are taking and accepting food, which is what we want people to do, but they keep coming back and they're not utilizing it here in Wright County. They're taking it back to the cities and selling the food to get money for whatever purposes they're going to use it for. And I see that from their vantage point, that they're saying we're not meeting the needs of those that are within Wright County itself. And so what they're asking is there some way that we can put guardrails around? I said, well, what are you doing? How do you know this? And they said, we've put people on to track them, to find out where they come from, because they keep showing up. And when they sign in to say that they want to accept food, that's all they're asking for is a signature, no address, no anything. They've put someone on as a tracker to find where they're coming from. And it's an ongoing problem. They say, we can't keep enough food available to these people. Now, Granted, food is a very important thing to everybody, not just certain individuals, but for everybody to have it. But when you take and you defraud or you take an advantage of one entity, whether it's in this town or the other town or in the county, it means that someone gets shortchanged within their own area of living. So I'm looking forward to this bill going into effect, and that I hope that when the conference committee comes, both the House and Senate can come to an agreement, and that we make this a very positive step in the right direction of solving the fraud that is, as we've heard, people falsifying their names, falsifying who they are, and basically being ghost people to the acceptance of government financial help and also food help. So thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I'd like to thank two members, particularly Senator Gustafson and Senator Kroon, for their work on this bill. I worked with both of them on the bill. Those two members put in countless hours on this bill. And as you look at the bill, we're in the 9th engrossment. After this next engrossment will be in the 10th engrossment of this bill. So what does that say to us about the bill and the work that went into it? Members, this is how bills used to be done here before we ran into huge omnibus bills that take the place of the work that goes into actually a single subject bill like this one in front of us. But this is how bills are supposed to be done. The work and the grind to go through and do the things you need to do in order to bring the bill into the best shape that it can be coming off the Senate floor. And with the leadership of Senator Gustafson and Senator Kroon and a raft of us that worked with them on this bill, thank all of you for your input and help into this bill. Thank you, Senator Kroon and Senator Gustafson. With that being said, Mr. President, over the last 4 years and over the last 6 years, Minnesota has become a national embarrassment. We had $250 million of fraud in the Feeding Our Future fraud scandal, over $600 million in the last 6 years on various schemes of fraud. And as Senator Anderson began to point out, sometimes and many times when you have unbelievable amounts of money available, the people's money made available by government, and I don't vote for many of those, Mr. President, but it is a public policy choice of this legislature to do so. And when you do so, greed can take over by the people who may have access to it. This bill is a great start for Minnesota to reclaim its dignity, for state government to reclaim its dignity again, and for the people of our state to start to heal and begin to regain the lost trust that the national embarrassment has cost us. So with that, Mr. President, members, I encourage your support for this bill. Let's move the bill on to its 11th engrossment, and let's bring forward an Office of the Inspector General that holds people accountable, that protects the resources of the people of Minnesota, that protects those programs that are public policy decisions of this body, and brings us towards a better government and a better Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Gustafson yield, please?
Senator Gustafson, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Hoffman.
So, Mr. President, I would like to know the process in which the Medicaid state agency, the Department of Human Services, was utilized in this discussion.
Senator Gustafson, if you understand that question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't quite, but I can take a stab at it. We have been meeting over 50 meetings with agencies, including up until 11 o'clock last night and then first thing this morning. We met with them all day yesterday, both DCYF, DHS, MDH, MDE, all of them. They've been active in this. We've been able to take the edits that we've been able to take. We're satisfied that the language is where it's supposed to be, and I hope that's a detailed question.
Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. It doesn't fully answer my question. I'm wondering if the good senator will yield again.
Will you yield again? She will yield again. Senator Hoffman.
Senator, could you please help me understand the agreement that the Centers for Medicaid Services has when they outline the compliance of federal Medicaid law and regulations to the state of Minnesota?
Senator Gustafson to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I understand that, as Senator Wickland said, that this is a complicated area, and I respect that Senator Hoffman has a lot of expertise in this area. We have met with the agencies and taken in their concerns. I don't know that I want to get into the weeds about all of the details, and if that is the conversation, that can be something we can do offline. But I will say that with Senator Cruin's amendment, we now have federal permission. We have to seek federal permission and their approval on our interagency agreements. That should suffice any problems that people have about whether or not our federal funding is in jeopardy.
Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are we on a time schedule here, Mr. President? It's a question to the body, or am I able to, as long as I have the microphone, I have the floor. Is that correct?
As long as you have the microphone, you have the floor. I ask that you just be considerate of the fact that there are others who are on the list to speak.
I'm going to be as considerate as somebody being considerate to tell me if I don't appreciate or I don't like the bill. I can certainly vote no against it, Mr. President. So let me bring you a true, honest to goodness story. There was a few years ago where Medicaid officials who actually work at the Department of Human Services in the state of Minnesota, they were previously federal Medicaid relations attorneys. I'm not going to tell an attorney joke, but I'm just telling you that the people understanding Medicaid, so you even heard from the good senator from Ham Lake or Blaine that is a complicated issue. Well, if it's so complicated, then why did it take so long for the folks to get together with the Department of Human Services? And when I look at the amendment that was so-called supposed to be fixed, Mr. President, it is not fixed. The stuff that the Department of Human Services sent over is not in this bill, and that's concerning. And I'm going to tell you why it's concerning in a few minutes. But I'm going to tell you about a few years ago, the Centers for Medicaid Services said, if you do this in the state of Minnesota, we're probably not going to approve it based upon the fact of your Medicaid plan that the state's supposed to do. And did you know this? That when you see one Medicaid plan in the state, you've seen one Medicaid plan in the state. So here's what happened. A few years ago, there was a change to school social worker MA billing. Do you all know what MA stands for? If you don't, it's medical assistance billing. So it was school social workers. And what happened is we as a body, Senator from Anoka was the chair, we as a body did not listen to the experts at the Department of Human Services that were, did I tell you they were actual former federal Medicaid relations folks? What happened was CMS, Centers for Medicaid Services, denied the approval because the legislature just happened to not be in session, right? Well, what that happened then when the delay came out, or actually the denial came out, is DHS had to delay the implementation of an entire provision of law that we passed that same year. And it couldn't be dealt with until we came back in session. And then, Mr. President, we had to go seek approval again from Centers for Medicaid Services, from a body, which then was another year and a half. So we couldn't do that. We had to get approval the following session. If we as a body would have listened to and moved forward with the language that the department, did I tell you this, Mr. President? They actually have Medicaid experts that are in staff that do this stuff. And I get that, right? But if we would have done that, we would have been better off because we wouldn't have put it back. So here's the risk. You're going to make headlines with this bill. Woo! There it is. Medicaid. We just got it, right? It's going to make headlines. But you didn't do your due diligence. You didn't do your thing about subpoena power. You didn't do the understanding of due process. You didn't do what should be done for the people of Minnesota. And with that, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, I will say this next year when CMS says, yeah, we're not going to approve this, I'm not going to say I told you so. I'm going to ask you why you didn't listen to the Department of Human Services. With that, members, this bill, although it's a great front page of a newspaper article, it's not ready for prime time. Vote no.
Senator Duckworth.
I was really hoping to not be the one to follow that. First and foremost, I want to thank the folks that worked very hard on this bill. And I certainly respect those that have subject matter expertise in it. But I'm a pretty simple guy. Fraud is bad. Passing a bill to stop and fix fraud, that's a good thing in my book. So thank you for those that have done the work on this bill so far. And I think it's about time that the legislative branch of government took a stand on behalf of the people of Minnesota and put in place some measures to discover and extinguish the rampant fraud that's occurred in our state over the last few years. I think it's important to note that if it were up to the governor, nothing else would happen right now. He moved a couple of people, I should say a few people, from one department to another, and that's supposed to magically fix all the $600+ million in fraud that we've seen throughout the state of Minnesota. And I hate to break it to you, that's not going to cut it. The legislature has to get involved. That's what this bill does. But the reason I wanted to give some remarks, Mr. President, is this. As much as this seems somewhat like a victory lap for us all here today to take a good bipartisan vote on a bill to stop fraud, we have to ensure it actually gets across the finish line by the end of session. We can't just pass this out of the Senate and forget about it. If this doesn't go all the way to the governor's desk and reluctantly get his signature, then we will have failed the people of Minnesota, because failing to do anything about it will not be tolerated by the people that we represent. And that's why this bill has to get across the finish line. As I mentioned before, over the last few years, over $600+ million in fraud, money that we would certainly love to have right about now when we're talking about cuts in the face of a $6 billion deficit. We've got to get serious about combating fraud. Minnesotans expect it. If we don't pass this bill, then what will we have done as a legislature? The answer is nothing. And the people of Minnesota simply will not accept that, Mr. President. So, with all due respect to the senator from Minnesota who just spoke, I appreciate his passion. I appreciate where he's coming from. But at the end of the day, sometimes it is simple. We're here to take a stand against fraud on behalf of the people of Minnesota. This bill is going to do that, and folks can rest assured that the legislature is going to hold our state government accountable for their taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Members, I want to make sure there's no one else before I go to the last two speakers, which will be Senator Kroon and Senator Gustafson. Seeing none, I'm going to Senator Kroon, followed by Senator Gustafson for final comments before we vote for final passage as amended on Senate File Number 856. Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill will help combat fraud in Minnesota. It will combat fraud across all of our state agencies. The law enforcement amendment that was placed onto the bill today was a fantastic amendment and a key amendment to make sure that this new Office of Inspector General has the tools that it will need to clamp down on fraud. We did a lot of work together on this process on how every detail, even how the Office of Inspector General is appointed. We went out of our way to make sure that this office would be as independent as possible while still making it constitutional. I would like to thank Senators Barr, Draheim, Curran, and Drazkowski from my caucus. They've been a real pleasure to work with, each bringing a unique set of experiences and perspectives to this matter, and engaging in our weekly meetings, and everybody bringing input into this process. I'd like to thank all the senators in the committees, the 10 or 11 committee stops that we went through for engaging in a substantive way and providing input, and us as bill authors then acting on that input. For the Democrat members, Mr. President, I'd like to thank Senator Marty. I enjoyed working with him for the first time on a bill. I thought it was a very respectful and productive process to do that. Even if we didn't come to the exact same place, I certainly took a lot of his input into consideration and put it into the bill to make this bill a better bill, and I truly believe that. And so I'd like to especially thank Senator Gustafson. She committed to our shared values throughout this process when it comes to combating fraud. She works hard. She works with collaboration and with integrity. Even asking me to co-present the bill at all but one of our committee stops. You know, a member from the other party. You don't see that very often. So that was a really cool experience to be a part of. And it really shows that it's amazing what we can accomplish when we're committed to doing the work rather than just getting credit. And so it's been a real joy. All the members who worked on this bill shared the desire to stop fraud. We were reasonable, patient. We listened to all the perspectives, working hard to make the bill work. And speaking for myself, I went as far as I could go to take all of that input and put it into the bill. Collaboration, yes. Working together, yes. To have the interagency agreements, yes, absolutely. But at all points, the hard line for me was not to limit the jurisdiction of the Office of Inspector General to do its job, to be effective in combating fraud, which is what Minnesotans expect from us. There may be situations where the OIG has to step in when the agency doesn't, or maybe even the OIG has to investigate something going on within the agency at times, and we need to allow the flexibility and the jurisdiction for the Office of Inspector General to do that when needed. I think we walked that line very well. The amendment that we put on that requires federal approval from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for certain provisions of the bill was a good amendment. And if the federal government doesn't approve, then all that will happen is those provisions that are subject to that won't go into effect, but the rest of the bill still will, and the Office of Inspector General will still be able to do the good work that we here as a body today are going to be giving the authority to do. So even if that happens, this is a good bill. And it will help combat fraud. And when it comes to fraud in Minnesota, the status quo isn't an option. We need action, and this bill does that. We're doing the work here today that Minnesotans expect us to do. And I'd like to thank all of the people that worked on this bill, and let's show Minnesota with a strong bipartisan vote that we can do the people's work when we put our mind to it, and I encourage all members to vote yes. Thank you.
Senator Gustafson, for your final words before we vote on final passage of Senate File Number 856.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr. President. Colleagues, when we vote today, we're not voting on a partisan issue. Everybody has told me when I've asked them about this bill that they care about combating fraud and misuse of our taxpayer dollars. What we're voting on is whether Minnesota should have a strong, independent oversight of public funding. This bill protects Minnesotans. It does. It ensures that public money, our constituents' money, is used for its intended purpose. It doesn't replace agency efforts. It complements them. It doesn't conflict with federal law. It works alongside it. And I'll say this plainly, opposition to oversight is not a defense of good government. It is a defense of the status quo. And the next scandal that breaks, we want to be able to say we did every single thing we could. This is a good bill. It was worked on bipartisan, bicameral, with all the agencies actively, and we made sure that everybody got to have a say in how it was drafted so that it was right for everybody because it will work for everybody. This is probably the bill that I have learned the most on in my time here. I've had a lot of big bills, but this one taught me so much about not just our government, how it works, how it can run efficiently, but it taught me how to work with other people on the other side of the aisle, people who I may not always agree with, but we found common ground and we buckled down, we kept our heads down, and we did the work. So I'm very proud of that. And with that, I'd like to do a few thank yous. Michaela Matonis, Haley Bloom Peterson, Stephanie James, Allie Hoffman-Litchie, Nolan Hudala, Carly O'Neill, Pete Globa, Margaret Martin, Senator Latz, Senator Putnam, Senator Draheim, Senator Cran, Drazkowski, Senator Dibble, Marty, Matthews, Abler, Zhang, and most of all, Senator Cruen. I highly recommend putting a nerdy lawyer on your bills. It is really helpful. And I know I've said this several times in the retiring room, but not everybody knows that both Senator Cruen and I were at Morehead State together at the same time. We did not know each other, but I think for a couple of Morehead State grads, we did pretty good on this bill. He has been a partner this whole time. He has been fair. He has been responsive, and we put a lot of work into this. I'm very grateful to have both Democrat and Republican senators who took the time to sit down and make sure we got this right. And we did. I urge your support. Thank you.
The Secretary will take the roll for final passage on Senate File 856 as amended. Members, please vote. Senator Rasmussen, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Draheim votes aye.
Senator Draheim votes aye.
Senator Jasinski votes aye.
Senator Jasinski votes aye.
And thank you, Mr. President. Senator Johnson votes aye.
And Senator Johnson votes aye. Senator French, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Kunish votes yes.
Senator Kunish votes aye.
Senator Latz votes yes.
Senator Latz votes aye.
Senator Umu Verbaeten votes yes.
Senator Umu Verbaeten votes aye.
Senator Clark votes yes.
Senator Clark votes aye.
Senator Seeberger votes yes.
Senator Seeberger votes aye.
Senator Westland votes yes.
Senator Westland votes aye.
Senator Zhang votes yes.
Senator Zhang votes aye.
Senator Dibble votes yes.
Senator Dibble votes aye.
Senator Klein votes yes.
Senator Klein votes aye.
Senator Johnson Stewart votes yes.
And Senator Johnson Stewart votes aye.
And Senator Carlson votes aye.
And Senator Carlson votes aye. All members having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 7 noes, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Senator Murphy for a motion.
Mr. President, I move a brief recess for the purpose of appointing conference committees.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The Senate is now in recess for the purpose of identifying conference committees. The Senate will come to order. Senator Murphy.
Mr. President, is there a privileged report at the desk?
There is a privileged report at the desk. The Secretary will read the privileged report.
Senator Murphy from the Subcommittee on Conference Committees recommends that the following senators be, and they hereby are, appointed as a conference committee on House File Number 2434, Senators Hoffman, Fateh, May-Quade, Mohammed, and Abler. And House File Number 2115, Senators Hoffman, Fateh, May Quaid, Rasmussen, and Abler. Senator Murphy moves that the foregoing appointments be approved.
To the motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members will now proceed to the 13th order of business, which is announcements of Senate interest. Any announcements of Senate interest? Without objection, the following members will be excused. Anderson, 1:50 to 2 p.m. Johnson, 2 o'clock to 2:20. Any other announcements of Senate interest? Seeing none, Senator Murphy for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn until Friday, May 9th at 11 a.m.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The Senate is now adjourned.